The Valkorian Empire had been conquering star systems for nearly a decade, and their empress commanded fleets that could destroy entire worlds in a matter of hours. So when they turned their attention toward human space, the United Earth Coalition knew they had no chance of winning a direct war against such a powerful enemy. The coalition leaders met in secret and discussed their options for many days and nights. But every simulation showed the same result, which was total defeat within 6 months if they chose to fight. So they decided to offer something unexpected instead of military resistance. They proposed a marriage alliance. The Valkorians found this proposal amusing at first, because they considered humans to be a minor species that was only good for trade and cheap labor. But Empress Shayela saw an opportunity in the offer that her advisors had missed. A human consort would show the other conquered races that even the weakest species could join the empire peacefully, and it would make her appear merciful and wise. So she accepted the proposal and demanded that humanity send their tribute husband within 30 days. The man they chose was named Daniel Cole, and he arrived on the Valkorian throne world aboard a small transport ship with no military escort and no diplomatic fanfare. He walked through the massive doors of the imperial palace, carrying only a small travel bag and wearing simple civilian clothes that made him look like a clerk or perhaps a minor government worker. The Valkorian nobles who lined the grand hall watched him with barely hidden amusement, and some of them whispered jokes to each other about the pathetic tribute that humanity had sent. Daniel was tall for a human, with calm gray eyes and brown hair that showed traces of silver at his temples, and he walked with a steady pace that was neither hurried nor slow as he approached the throne at the far end of the hall. Empress Shayela studied him from her elevated seat, and she crossed all 4 of her arms in a gesture that showed imperial patience mixed with mild curiosity. The Valkorians were impressive beings who stood nearly 8 feet tall with skin the color of polished black stone and eyes that glowed a soft amber color in the dim light of the throne room. "You are the tribute husband that the humans have sent to me," she said in a voice that echoed through the hall, and it was not a question, but a statement of fact. Daniel bowed his head in a respectful manner and replied, "I am, Your Imperial Majesty, and I hope to serve as a bridge between our two peoples and bring lasting peace to both our civilizations." The court erupted in laughter at his words, and many nobles shook their heads at the absurdity of a human speaking about bridges and peace as if he had any power at all. Commander Torvax, a scarred military leader who had conquered 3 star systems personally, stepped forward from his position near the throne and looked down at Daniel with open contempt. "A bridge," Torvax said loudly so everyone could hear. "You are not a bridge, human. You are a symbol and nothing more. A pet to show that your weak species has finally accepted its proper place beneath us." Daniel said nothing in response and simply stood there waiting with a calm expression that seemed impossible given the circumstances. The Empress raised one of her hands and the court fell silent immediately, because no one dared to speak when she commanded silence. "He is quiet, and that is acceptable," she announced. "The wedding ceremony will take place in 3 days, and until then, you will assign him quarters that are appropriate for his station." His station, as Daniel soon discovered, meant a small room in the servants' wing of the palace that was barely larger than a storage closet. The bed was narrow, and the furniture was old, and the single window looked out onto a back courtyard where garbage was collected. But Daniel unpacked his bag and arranged his few belongings without any complaint. Servants brought him simple meals of leftover food from the main kitchens, and he ate everything they gave him and thanked them sincerely each time they came. He spent his days reading Valkorian history texts that he had downloaded before leaving Earth, and he studied their language and customs with careful attention to every detail. The servants who attended him found his behavior confusing because he did not act like any noble or diplomat they'd ever seen before. He learned their names and remembered them, and he asked about their families and their lives, and he listened to their answers as if he truly cared about what they had to say on the second day before the wedding. A young Valkorian servant named Narration came to deliver his evening meal, and she found him sitting by the window. Reading quietly, she placed the tray on the small table and hesitated before speaking, because servants were not supposed to talk to guests unless spoken to first. "May I ask you something?" she finally said in a nervous voice. Daniel looked up from his reading and smiled warmly at her. "Of course you may ask me anything. Why are you not angry about how they are treating you?" Morale asked. "You're going to marry the Empress herself, but they house you with servants and feed you scraps from the kitchen." Daniel considered her question for a moment before answering. "Should I be angry about these things?" "Yes," Morale said with confusion in her voice. "Anyone else would be furious and demanding better treatment. The room is comfortable enough for sleeping," Daniel said. "The food is nutritious and fills my stomach. And I have met many interesting people here, including you. So I think I am quite fortunate, actually." Morale did not know what to make of his answer, and she left the room. Feeling strange about the encounter, she reported his words to the head of household, who found them curious enough to report to the Empress's personal secretary. And by the morning of the wedding, nearly half the palace staff had heard about the strange human who seemed genuinely happy despite being treated so poorly. The wedding ceremony itself was brief and purely political, with no celebration or joy. Shayla spoke the required words in a flat and bored tone, and she barely looked at Daniel during the entire proceeding. Daniel spoke his vows clearly and without hesitation, even though his pronunciation of the Valkorian language was not perfect. And when the ceremony was complete, the Empress departed immediately for a military briefing. Daniel stood alone in the ceremonial chamber for several minutes after everyone had left, and he looked around at the empty room with an expression that no one was there to see. He was now technically the Emperor Consort of the mighty Valkorian Empire, but in practice he was completely invisible and utterly powerless, or so everyone believed. 3 months passed since the wedding, and Daniel Cole settled into a daily routine that the entire Valkorian court found completely baffling. He attended every public function and ceremony, but he always stood silently at the edge of the room where no one important would notice him. He never spoke unless someone spoke to him first, and even then his answers were brief and polite, and, unmemorably, took his meals with the servants in the kitchen rather than demanding a place at the imperial table where he technically had a right to side. Walked through the palace gardens in the early morning hours when the light was soft and golden, and he often stopped to help the groundskeepers pull weeds or trim hedges or carry heavy bags of soil. The nobles of the court found this behavior embarrassing because a consort was supposed to project power and importance through his connection to the Empress. Daniel projected nothing at all, and he seemed completely content to be invisible. Commander Torvax was particularly loud in expressing his contempt for the human consort, and he took every opportunity to mock Daniel in front of others at a military celebration honoring a recent conquest of a distant star system. Torvax cornered Daniel near the refreshment tables while dozens of important guests watched. "Tell me something, human," Torvax said in a booming voice that carried across the entire room. "Do you have any useful skills at all, or did your people simply send us the most expendable citizen they could find?" Daniel thought about the question for a moment, as if it deserved serious consideration. "I can cook fairly well," he said calmly. "I am also reasonably good at chess, although I understand your people prefer strategy games with more dimensions and complexity." The room went completely silent for a moment, and then Torvax threw back his head and laughed so hard that his whole body shook. "Cook," he bellowed to the crowd. "The Emperor Consort of the mighty Valkorian Empire can cook food. Perhaps we should assign him to work in the kitchens with the other servants. I would be happy to help there." Daniel replied without any trace of embarrassment. "I have heard that your head chef is having trouble with the spice shipments from the outer colonies, and I might be able to suggest some useful alternatives. This response was so unexpected that Torvax had nothing to say, and he simply stared at Daniel for a long moment before walking away while muttering about the complete absurdity of humans. But the head chef of the Imperial Kitchen, a massive Valkorian named Gethros, who had served the palace for 40 years, heard about this exchange from one of the servers. Out of pure curiosity, he sent a message inviting Daniel to visit the kitchens the next morning. What happened during that visit would become a legend among the palace staff for years to come. Daniel arrived at the kitchen before dawn, and he spent the next 6 hours working alongside the cooking crew without ever trying to take charge or impress anyone with his knowledge. Asked questions about their methods, and he listened carefully to every answer, and he only offered suggestions when someone specifically asked for his opinion. By the end of the day, he had helped solve 3 different supply problems that had been causing headaches in the kitchen for months. Gethros gathered his staff that evening and told them, "The human consort is either the strangest diplomat I have ever encountered or the most clever one. I have not yet decided which possibility is more likely." Word of Daniel's kitchen visit spread quickly through the servant quarters, and then other reports began to emerge about his activities. He had spent an entire afternoon in the palace medical ward, talking with wounded soldiers who had returned from the front lines of the latest military campaign. He had helped a young servant girl with her mathematics homework when he found her crying in a hallway because she did not understand the problems. Had offered to teach human languages to anyone who was interested in learning, and several servants had started attending informal lessons in his small room. The Empress heard these reports during her regular intelligence briefings, and she grew more confused with each new piece of information. Spies could find nothing suspicious in Daniel's behavior because he was not gathering military secrets or making political alliances with powerful nobles. He was simply being helpful to everyone he met. What is his purpose? She demanded during a private meeting with her advisors. Every action must have a reason behind it, so what is he trying to accomplish? Counselor Thrain, an elderly Valkorian who had served 3 generations of emperors, shook his head slowly. "We cannot determine any hidden purpose, Majesty, and we have tried very hard to find one." "That is not possible," Shayla insisted. "No one behaves with such kindness without wanting something in return." "Perhaps," Thrain said in a thoughtful voice, "but consider what he has achieved without seeming to try. The servants speak highly of him everywhere. The kitchen staff considers him a true friend. Even some of the wounded soldiers have expressed genuine respect for the human who sat with them and listened to their stories. And what does any of that matter?" the Empress asked with irritation. "It may matter more than we realize," Thrain replied. "He has no power and no authority and no weapons. But he is accumulating something that cannot be easily measured. And what is that? Goodwill, Majesty, and loyalty. And among our people, those things have value, even if we do not often speak of them." Shayla dismissed the matter with a wave of her hand because she had more important things to worry about than the strange behavior of one irrelevant. Human goodwill from servants and cooks meant nothing in the serious business of running an empire that spanned 17 star systems. She had military campaigns to plan and conquered peoples to manage, and rival powers to watch with careful attention. Daniel Cole was a footnote in her reign, and nothing more. She would realize very soon how completely wrong she was about him. The crisis that changed everything began with an assassination attempt on a night that should have been filled with celebration. 6 months had passed since Daniel's arrival on the Valkorian throne world, and the Empress was hosting a grand ceremonial dinner to celebrate her birthday with hundreds of guests. Great Hall was filled with nobles and military commanders and diplomats from allied systems, and the finest food and drink flowed freely while musicians played traditional songs. Daniel stood near the back of the room, as he always did, watching the festivities from the shadows where no one paid attention to him. He had become so invisible Over the past months that most guests did not even notice he was present, but he noticed everything. Noticed when 3 servers entered through a side door wearing uniforms that did not quite fit properly. He noticed the way they moved through the crowd with purpose rather than the casual wandering of real servants. He noticed the slight bulges beneath their clothing where weapons were hidden. He noticed all of this in the space of 2 heartbeats, and then he began to move the 3 assassins. Were insurgents from a world that the Empire had conquered just 2 years earlier, and they had spent months planning this attack. They had somehow acquired Valkorian military weapons, and they had bribed their way past the outer security checkpoints. And now they were raising those weapons toward the Empress's table. The guards saw the threat too late, and they were too far away to reach the assassins before shots were fired. But Daniel was not too far away. What happened next would be analyzed on security recordings thousands of times in the years that followed. The human consort crossed 15 feet of open floor in less than 1 second, moving faster than any human should be able to move. He reached the first assassin and disarmed him with a twisting motion that was almost too quick to see, redirecting the weapon to fire a single shot into the second attacker. The third assassin managed to pull his trigger once, but the shot went wide because Daniel's hand was already closing around his throat. Daniel applied precise pressure to a nerve cluster at the base of the assassin's skull, and the man collapsed unconscious before he could fire again. The entire attack lasted less than 3 seconds from start to finish. Daniel stood in the center of the great hall surrounded by 3 fallen bodies, and his expression had not changed from its usual calm pleasantness. Straightened his formal jacket, which had become slightly wrinkled during the brief fight, and then he turned to face the Empress. "Are you injured, Your Majesty?" he asked in the same polite voice he always used. The entire room was frozen in shock, and hundreds of eyes stared at the human consort as if seeing him for the very first time. Empress Shayla rose slowly from her seat, and her amber eyes were wide with an emotion that might have been fear or might have been something else entirely. "What are you?" she whispered before Daniel could answer. A small communication device on his wrist made a soft chiming sound. He glanced down at it and something changed in his face, a subtle tightening around his eyes that had never been visible before. "Forgive me," he said, and his voice was still polite, but now it carried a tone of command that made several nearby nobles take unconscious steps backward. "I need to make an important call." He raised the communicator to his ear and spoke clearly. "Cole here. Authorization code Prometheus 7. Connect me immediately to Admiral Vance at Coalition Command." The room had been silent before, but now it became so quiet that Daniel's next words seemed to echo from the walls. "Admiral, the situation on Valkoria Prime has been compromised earlier than expected. Activate Protocol 9 and deploy all available assets to their designated positions. And Admiral," he paused and looked directly at the Empress, "inform the Coalition Council that the waiting period is over. It is time to reveal our true capabilities." He ended the call and returned his full attention to Shayla, who was now descending from her throne with all 4 hands clenched into tight fists. "I owe you an explanation," Daniel said, "and you deserve to hear the truth." Commander Torvax finally found his voice, and he pushed forward through the crowd with rage burning in his eyes. "You are a spy," he shouted. "You have been deceiving us this entire time." "No," Daniel replied calmly. "A spy hides in the shadows and gathers secrets without anyone knowing. But I place myself at the very heart of your government with your full knowledge and consent. Every piece of information I have gathered over these months, I gathered in plain sight where anyone could see." He paused and let his words sink in. "The difference between us is simple. I understood the significance of what I was seeing, and you did not understand the significance of what you were showing me." The Empress stopped just a few feet from Daniel, and she towered over him by nearly 2 feet, but somehow he did not seem small. "Explain yourself clearly," she commanded, "or I will have you executed where you stand." Daniel smiled, but it was not the pleasant, harmless smile that the court had grown accustomed to over the past 6 months. It was the smile of someone who held cards that no one else knew existed. I would not recommend that course of action. Majesty, he said, because at this very moment there are 47 coalition warships positioned inside your defensive perimeter, all of them cloaked and all of them waiting for my signal. The Empress's eyes widened, but Daniel continued speaking. Every significant military installation in your empire has been mapped and analyzed and targeted, and the humans you dismissed as weak and expendable have spent the last 100 years preparing for exactly this moment. He let those words hang in the air before adding one more thing. But the most important reason you should not execute me is this. I do not want to be your enemy. I never did, and I still hope that we can find a better path forward together. The Empress ordered everyone to leave the Great Hall immediately, and only her most trusted advisors were permitted to remain. Counselor Thrain stood with his hands clasped behind his back and his ancient face showing deep concern. Commander Torvax paced back and forth like a caged animal, with fury radiating from every movement. Director Sena, the head of Imperial Intelligence, watched Daniel with cold, calculating eyes that missed nothing. The 4 Valkyrians faced a single human across the ceremonial table, and the balance of power in the room was nothing like it appeared. You will explain everything, the Empress commanded, and you will do so now. Daniel nodded respectfully and began to speak in a calm, measured voice. When your empire first made contact with humanity, approximately 50 years ago, you conducted an assessment of our species, and you concluded that we were weak and divided and militarily inferior to every major power in this region of space. He paused and looked at each of the Valkyrians in turn. That assessment was not wrong. It was simply incomplete. And we worked very hard to ensure that it would remain incomplete for as long as possible. Director Sena leaned forward with sudden interest. Are you saying that the Coalition has been deliberately deceiving us about your true capabilities? I am saying that we showed you exactly what we wanted you to see, Daniel replied. Humanity has a long and complicated history, and one thing we learned very early is that being underestimated is often more valuable than being feared. He began to walk slowly around the table as he continued his explanation. When the first alien species made contact with Earth 200 years ago, they looked at our primitive rockets and our internal conflicts, and they concluded that we posed no threat to anyone. And they were absolutely correct at that time. But while they were ignoring us, we were watching and learning. Every species we encountered taught us something valuable. Every technology we traded for gave us new ideas. Every conflict we witnessed showed us how galactic politics actually worked. Commander Torvax stopped his pacing and stared at Daniel. You are telling us that humans have been planning this for 2 centuries. We have been preparing, Daniel corrected gently. Not planning for any specific outcome, but preparing for many possible futures. We knew that eventually a powerful empire would turn its attention toward our territory, and we wanted to be ready when that happened. The Empress spoke in a voice that was cold and hard. Ready for war against us. Ready for peace, Daniel said. But peace on terms that we could accept with dignity and security. He stopped walking and faced her directly. Your empire controls 17 star systems and commands, military forces that could glass entire worlds. By every obvious measurement, you should be able to crush humanity without any real difficulty. Then why have we not done so? Shahil asked. Because we have been useful and compliant and unthreatening, Daniel answered. And while you were looking outward at bigger prizes and more obvious enemies, we were quietly building something that you never imagined we could build. He produced a small device from his pocket and activated a holographic display that floated above the table. The image showed a map of known space, but it was marked very differently from any Valkyrian. Charred human symbols appeared everywhere throughout. Dozens of star systems including several that were deep within the heart of Valkorian territory, shadow stations, Daniel explained. Hidden listening posts and emergency supply caches and evacuation routes and communications relays. We have been positioning these assets for nearly a century, and we have done so with patience and care. Counselor Thrain studied the map with growing alarm visible on his aged face. Some of these positions are in our most secure core systems. How is this possible without our knowledge? Humans are physically smaller than most species, Daniel said simply. We fit into places that your people never think to look. And we are patient in ways that longer-lived species sometimes fail to appreciate. We think in generations, not just in years. Director Sena was making rapid calculations in her head. Even with these positions, your military forces cannot match ours in direct combat. You are probably correct, Daniel admitted. But war is not only about direct combat. It is about supply lines and communication networks, and the will to keep fighting. We have spent 100 years making sure that any war with humanity would be long and costly and uncertain. He deactivated the hologram and met the Empress's eyes. But I did not come here to threaten you. Majesty, I came here hoping to find a different path. What path? She demanded. True partnership between our peoples, Daniel said. Not the false peace of domination where one side rules and the other submits, but genuine cooperation between equals who respect each other's strengths. Commander Torvax laughed harshly. You expect us to treat humans as equals after you have deceived us so thoroughly. I expect you to recognize that we were never as weak as you believed, Daniel replied calmly. And I expect you to ask yourselves what kind of neighbors you would prefer to have. He looked at each of them again with absolute seriousness. Humanity does not want to destroy your empire. We want to live alongside it in peace and security. But if you force us to fight, then we will fight with everything we have. And your empire will learn what humans learned long ago through bitter experience. And what is that? The Empress asked quietly. That we are perhaps the most dangerous species in this galaxy, Daniel said. Not because of our technology or our numbers, but because of what we are willing to sacrifice to protect our home and our future. The room was silent for a long moment, so the question, Majesty, Daniel continued, is not whether you can defeat us. The question is whether the cost of trying would be worth the prize, and whether there might be a better option available to us both. The negotiations between humanity and the Valkorian Empire lasted for 3 difficult weeks. They were held in the same great hall where Daniel had stopped the assassination attempt, and the servants had started calling it the Hall of Revelation, because of what had been revealed there. At first, the discussions were tense and hostile, with Commander Torvax arguing loudly for immediate war. He insisted that Valkorian honor demanded they meet human deception with overwhelming military force, and several other commanders agreed with him completely. But Counselor Thrain presented detailed intelligence assessments that painted a different picture. The human shadow network was real and extensive. Coalition forces were better positioned than anyone had imagined, and a war would be extremely costly with no guarantee of victory, even if we eventually win such a conflict. Thrain said during a private meeting with the Empress, what exactly do we gain from it? We would have a species that hates us forever and will resist our rule at every opportunity. He paused and chose his next words carefully. We have seen what happens when humans decide to resist to something. They are patient beyond belief, and they plan across generations. Can we truly afford to make such determined enemies? The Empress said nothing in response, because she was thinking about Daniel in the weeks since his true nature had been revealed. He had continued his usual routine without any apparent change. Still visited the kitchens to help Gethros with meal planning. He still checked on the servants he had befriended and remembered all their names. Still walked in the gardens in the early morning light. but the court saw him differently now and there. There was no more laughter or dismissive jokes when he entered a room when Daniel Cole appeared somewhere. Everyone paid close attention. Shayla found herself watching him during the long negotiation sessions, and she noticed things she had never seen before. He never raised his voice even when discussing difficult topics. He never threatened or made demands or tried to intimidate anyone. He simply stated facts and asked thoughtful questions and proposed solutions with the same calm patience he had shown when everyone thought he was powerless during a break in the formal discussions. The Empress approached him in a quiet corner of the hall. "You could have conquered us," she said, without greeting. "Your hidden network and your cloaked fleet gave you the advantage of surprise. So why are you willing to negotiate at all?" Daniel considered her question with obvious seriousness. "Because conquest has never been our goal, Majesty. It was not our goal a century ago when we started building our shadow network, and it is not our goal today. Then, what do you actually want? Survival, first of all, and security for our people and our worlds, and the opportunity to build something that is worth building. And perhaps eventually friendship with species like yours." Friendship. The Empress repeated the word as if it came from a foreign language she did not speak. "Between those who conquer and those who are conquered. Between equals who chose partnership instead of destruction." Daniel replied, "Your empire has accomplished truly remarkable things over 3,000 years. Your art and architecture and scientific achievements deserve to be remembered and celebrated. And so do ours." He smiled, and it seemed genuine rather than strategic. "Imagine what our two species could accomplish together if we were not wasting our energy on domination and resistance." Shayla was quiet for a long time before she asked another question. "Was any of it real, Daniel? The kindness and helpfulness during those first months? Or was it all just part of your strategy to gain information?" "The strategy was simply to be myself," he answered. "To show your people who humans really are when we feel safe and welcome. We are kind and curious, and we like helping others, and we work hard at whatever we choose to do." He met her eyes without flinching. "Everything I did in those 6 months was completely genuine, Majesty. I truly enjoyed working in your kitchens, and I truly care about the servants I befriended. And I truly hope that this marriage can become something more than just a political arrangement." "You are a very strange creature, Daniel Cole." "All humans are strange, Majesty. It is part of what makes us dangerous, and also part of what makes us worth knowing." The final agreement was signed exactly 1 year after the wedding ceremony had taken place. They called it the Human-Volcorian Compact, and it established a true partnership between equals. Both species agreed to mutual defense obligations and open trade routes and respect for each other's territory and sovereignty. The empire would not expand toward human space, and humanity would share certain technologies and strategic intelligence. Both civilizations would work together to address common threats that endangered them both. It was not the peace that anyone had expected when Daniel first arrived as a tribute husband. It was something much better. At the signing ceremony, the Empress stood beside her human consort and addressed hundreds of dignitaries from both civilizations. 1 year ago, she said, I believed I was accepting a tribute from a weak species, a symbol of human submission to our power. But I have learned that humans have no weakness, only strengths that they choose not to display until the proper moment arrives. She looked at Daniel, and something that might have been respect appeared in her amber eyes. My husband taught me something valuable about true authority. It is not about crushing those beneath you. It is about inspiring those around you. Daniel Cole came to this court as an invisible man with no power and no weapons. And through nothing but kindness and patience, he changed the course of an empire. Daniel stepped forward to address the assembly. I came here, prepared to be your enemy if that became necessary, he said. But I am grateful that it did not become necessary. The galaxy is vast and ancient, and there are dangers out there that neither of our species can face alone. Today we choose to face those dangers together." He paused and looked at the crowd of humans and Volcorians. "This is what humanity offers to the galaxy. Not conquest and not submission, but partnership. And if anyone doubts our resolve, let them remember this. We are the species that spent a century pretending to be weak so that we could be strong at exactly the right moment. Imagine what we can accomplish when we are no longer pretending." The applause that followed came from both species equally. In the years that followed, the Peon Compact became the foundation of the largest and most stable alliance in known space. Historians would debate exactly when humanity rose from minor species to galactic leader, but most agreed it began with a quiet man living in servants' quarters who peeled vegetables and made friends while waiting for his moment. Daniel Cole remained emperor consort for the rest of his life, and he never sought military rank or political power beyond his ceremonial role. But when he spoke, empires listened, and when the servants of the palace told stories to their children, they always spoke of the human who arrived with nothing, gave everything, and changed the galaxy forever through simple kindness. The end.